When it comes down to big picture, creating awareness and prevention, we go out to the community. We talk to however many people we need to talk to, because like you said earlier, there's still tons of people in this world that don't even know that human trafficking exists.
In the United States, on average, every 2 minutes, a child is bought or sold for sex. The average age of a child sold for sex is 13 years old. Human trafficking is the second fastest growing criminal industry, just behind drug trafficking. Hi, and welcome to Mid-South Viewpoint. I'm Byron Tyler. Today, we talk about human trafficking, the horror of this industry, and what it's doing to our children, and what it's doing to women, what it's doing to men. Hang on for the ride, because we're going to talk about some very serious things, but something that you need to know about, as January is National Slavery and Human Trafficking Prevention Month. Some friends from RestoreCorps, AIDS Victims and Trafficking. Rachel Haaga is here, and Rachel's been on the program before, and she brings Morgan Wright. Morgan, how are you doing?
Yes, I'm good.
Rachel, good to have you back.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
You've got help now.
Well, I do. I'm grateful that I'm more grateful than we have words for. And also, I feel just encouraged that you've seen, you actually, even in your proclamation to that reality, know that growth time. You've seen that growth over time.
I remember in the early days of you sharing, just you, basically, you know, getting calls all times of the night, and I'm sure that hasn't stopped. I imagine that part of the work continues. There's been an evolution of this ministry. You kind of want to back up a little bit and talk about the history for a second?
For those first few years, it was just myself and a few other team members who we were all operating kind of in that bivocational life of, as we've already covered, I was at Huey's, and then there's other volunteers that were with us on our volunteer crew fighting trafficking, who were either master's students at UT Health and Sciences. They were employed at other organizations around town, but just knew that this niche of people were still underserved in our community. One of our first volunteers there that composed our volunteer team was a grad student at Memphis Law. And so it was this evolution of this impassioned people who had seen this injustice actually for that core four, so to speak. We'd seen it mostly in international environments, myself in Cambodia, one of our other partners in Nepal, one of our other partners on the Mexico-Texas border, and one of the other volunteers in the Eastern Bloc countries around Russia. So living in these different places internationally and even nationally gave us a picture of what human trafficking is somewhere else. And then somehow, by God's grace, we found each other in those first few years to figure out how to respond to that knowledge here locally. And so, honestly, yes, the calls still come all hours of the night, but now there is a team. And I think that's one thing that I've been reflecting on a lot, because I moved back to the States in 2010. I returned from Southeast Asia, living in Cambodia as a missionary for about 3 years, moving back to the States, and now 10 years later, I can look around at our staff meetings, sadly at this particular season on Zoom, and see this screen of abolitionists, really. Like, our team is actually over 20 people now. And so not only do we have those 24-hour phone calls still coming, but by God's sweet grace, I'm not the only one answering. For that matter, I'm not sure I could tell you the last time that I had to answer it, because we have incredible staff members that are like Morgan, come with their history, their vision, and just a sight to see themselves leverage their talents and their skills to fight for the victims of trafficking in our community.
It's estimated that 30.2 million people live in slavery in the world today. And I even saw a stat on another website that said over 40 million people are in that category. It seems like such an incredible feat to defeat this human trafficking. It looks like an overwhelming task. So why tackle such a big, brutal business like human trafficking?
I would probably argue why not.
Right.
I think that not only biblically, you even mentioned it in your prayer before we started, that we are every single day going out into the world trying to war against the enemy, but we are really just individually finding our own way to be obedient to the call in Scripture to ransom the captive. Yeah. And so what does that look like for me today? Me personally, that obviously looks different than another person walking down the street or anyone else parked in this parking lot today. Yeah. But if we claim Christ, if we claim ourselves to be along the side of the church, then we have to figure that out. There's a quote in our team that I try to repeat pretty often as revelation requires response. And so as Morgan already mentioned, she began in this work 8 years ago, not in Memphis, but when she returned to Memphis, or when she moved here, she was still compelled, even before she knew that might have been one of the idioms that I would repeat to her over the year and a half to come. But she had that conviction of, now I know what it looks like. How do I be obedient to seeing it in Baton Rouge, seeing it in Maryland, and then how do I do that in Memphis? There's another book around this subject. It's called The Good News About Injustice by Gary Haugen, and the good news is that the Lord wars against injustice. Yeah. And so when we enter into this work, we don't need to be immobilized by the breadth of 32 million people.
Exactly.
Rather catalyzed and galvanized that we are aligning ourselves with the Lord himself and fighting for
because
people.
The rescue can be one life at a time. Gary Haugen has been on the show in the past. I've had a chance to interview Gary here previously, and in his story, he used to be with the State Department, and his first encounter was in Rwanda after the genocide, when he went there and had to document all the cases for the Justice Department. He got woke, know. That's what happened, and that was the birth, really, of International Justice Mission. Well, we opened up these stats with a wider problem around the world, which you've mentioned. You traveled, to Cambodia. You've been in some of these places. Let's talk about the stronghold, Morgan, that you see right here in our community that maybe those listening are oblivious to, don't even realize what's going on right now here in our city.
I think my biggest thing that it is hard to tackle in my brain is that we're dealing with everyday hard life and poverty, and we're dealing with dysfunctional families. And so I think that if we tackle to the core of that, if we tackle the dysfunctional families, if we tackle having fathers in the kids' lives and moms in the kids' lives, that I think that when it comes down to human trafficking, the core issue is vulnerability.
Yes.
And so if the family unit is strong and healthy and aware of their trauma and their triggers, then I think that we can tackle this horrible situation in a much greater way.
The National Incidence Studies of Missing, Abducted, Runaway, and Throwaway Children reports that 1 in 4 children who run away from home are approached for commercial sexual exploitation within 48 hours of running away. That's so staggering to think about, ladies.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think it just goes back to what I just said. Is just, if the family unit was healthy and loving and supportive, then we wouldn't have kids running away and looking for love in other places. So, yeah, I think we just have to do a better job at loving on our kids and building them up for success, and success not outwardly but internal and emotionally,
right? So
they won't have to go out in the streets and look for that and fill that void in their heart.
In 2010 of November, a multi-agency investigation that was uncovered by the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation led to a federal indictment of 29 individuals who were affiliated with Somali gangs in the Middle District of Tennessee. They were arrested for trafficking girls as young as 12 across the U.S., including Tennessee. We've got to watch our children.
I think we do, but I think, too, if you don't mind, I would also like to point out that, yes, in 2010, the TBI brought that Somali case, and it went through the justice system for years, and our partners at End Slavery walked alongside those survivors in in unbelievable ways. But I think that it's really important that we also say that in 2011 here in Memphis, T-Rex Yarbrough, a Memphis man, was convicted of federal charges of 10 counts of human trafficking for also trafficking young Memphis girls across the United States, having children by them, ensuring that he maintained that control because their children would be held here in Memphis in Bartlett, in a home in Bartlett with his mother, as he moved their moms across the United States. And so then also in 2011, our federal counterparts here in Memphis, U.S. Attorney's Office brought and convicted Kayla Bray, who's a young woman at the time. She was 19 years old, blonde-haired, blue-eyed, also from Bartlett. And so I think that I'm pointing that out because I think that not only does it happen here, as we need to funnel that down, but we also have to acknowledge the fact that it actually doesn't often look like this extreme case of a Somalian network, but it is a person next door who somehow grooms a neighbor.
Yes.
Kayla was convicted of trafficking her two friends. So she was 19 years old, a young girl, and she trafficked two of her younger friends from Bartlett. And so I think that it's very important, if we're going to shed light on it, that we really bring that awareness to the full scope of it.
And that's why I brought you ladies in today, so we could, put that full scope on all of this. And according to the U.S. Department of Justice, there are girls as young as 5 and 6 years old in the U.S. that are forced to do sexual acts for economic gain by their pimp. Now, are we seeing girls that young in our city in the same circumstances?
I can't speak for our city, Memphis, but I think that over the time that I've been doing this work, one case that comes to mind, I had a little girl at 3 years old being trafficked.
You say 3 years?
3 years old.
Oh.
Her mom was a bottom, and so she was trafficking her kids in the life with the pimp that was over her. And statistically 13, but it goes all the way till they pop out.
I do want to clarify too, Morgan used the word bottom. That's kind of a slang term for what probably in a court case would be referred to as the victim offender, like the intersect between someone who has been victimized but is turned offender to lessen her own victimization as helping to control, helping to contribute. So that's the slang term for that internal second-tier controller in a pimp or a trafficker stable. Yeah. And I will say, yes, to everything that Morgan just said, I think our youngest referral last year was in that 3 to 7 year old range. It was a mom in one of the counties in West Tennessee, because we're actually first responders to the 21 counties of West Tennessee. So it was up around Jackson, Tennessee, a mom who was exploiting her kiddos. And so her younger kiddo is in that 3 to 5, 7 range. And I will say that that's what we had in Cambodia as well. I think that's the reality, is that oftentimes when it gets to that young, it is going to even be primarily the caretaker, because the caretaker, his or herself, has likely fallen into their own vulnerabilities, and that's what they have to leverage, is these other people that they're in the charge of. And then we also have to acknowledge, one of our other clients over the last few years, we were referred her when she was in her mid-20s, but her trafficking started when she was 5.
5 years old.
She came into our services, into our safe house at about 25. So she had been trafficked originally by mom and uncle, and then eventually by someone in the community, then eventually by by a boyfriend.
Rachel, so she already had 20 years of this lifestyle before you met her.
Yeah.
Yes. And she was only 25 years old. And I would say, even according to statistics, she had already beat the odds, because that other studies show that someone lasts in this lifestyle about 7 years. So the average lifespan for someone at the point of being victimized that first time is only about 7 years. And so if someone started at 12, even if we get to know her at 18 or 19, then in theory, she's already she's already beat the odds.
Yes.
And yet that's just the beginning of her journey to acknowledging trauma, acknowledging triggers, and really walking through to restoration.
Surfing the internet, where teens, obviously this service is so dangerous, with these mobile apps, social media apps. That's another way that kids are getting lured, right?
Absolutely. The reality with social media for any of us is that it seems safe because we're not looking at someone. And so the things that people say, even in their anger on social media, seem appropriate because they don't have to look at someone's face and their affect as they say these things. And so when vulnerable children especially are expressing their vulnerabilities because they feel like they have an audience, then someone who wants to exploit those vulnerabilities has all of that information at their fingertips. And so for them to, I think I already mentioned words like grooming and seasoning, that's kind of that recruitment aspect of a trafficker might see that a young teen has expressed things like, my mom doesn't understand me, my dad is never home, my dad works really hard thinking that he's providing for the family, but what I really want is for him to come to my softball game or my basketball game, etc. And so a trafficker, if he's wanting to exploit that teenage girl, just has to play on those. Well, I'll come and watch your basketball game. Where do you play? I'll come and sit in the stands, and nobody has to know about it. It can just be our secret, and I'll just be your secret cheering section. And so he's already playing on her desire to be welcome, to be loved, to have community, to be validated and valued. But he can already play like, we don't want your parents to feel bad, so let's just keep it our secret. So he's also already beginning that process of isolating her from her family and her other support systems.
What are some of the steps that RestoreCorp uses to help get these girls and women rescued and out of this entrapment?
I am going to quote someone from Homeboy Enterprises, Father Greg Boyle, in part of my response, and then I'm going to pass it to Morgan. And I made sure to be kind of meditating on this because even that word rescue, we actually as an organization, we try to stay far away from because we think that utilizing the idea of we're rescuing them doesn't give honor to the victim's personal agency in their own strength, in their own identity. And so as Father Greg Boyle writes about Homeboy Enterprises, which is a gang reduction organization originally in LA but is now international, he says, Homeboy receives people. It doesn't rescue them. In being received rather than rescued, gang members, because that's their audience, and I would say survivors of human trafficking, come to find themselves at home in their own skin. Homeboy's message is not, you can measure up someday. Rather, it is, who you are is enough. And when you have enough, you have plenty. In this effort, we are always paying attention and are obedient to that. The word obey has its origin in listening. It is difficult to truly and deeply listen. When a homeboy is sitting in front of my desk, the mantra on a continuous loop in my head is stay listening. Another handy one is now, hear, this, hear like H-E-R-E. Listen, hear, H-E-R-E, and now and only to this person. And so I think that really the first thing that we strive as a culture in our organization to do is to just be fully present with the survivor, for him or her to see that he or she has strength, that she has resilience, that she is already a world changer in her own right, because as we even already mentioned about that young woman who came to us at 25, she has endured more in her first 25 years of life than most of us will ever in 90.
Yes.
And so for us to communicate as a team as if we're the rescuer.
And two, ladies, that intrinsic value as a human being created in the image of God, that personhood, you are valued. You are valued because God created you.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Morgan?
Yeah. I mean, man, that's such a loaded question. I mean, going back to what Rachel was reading, come to find themselves, there's so many different ways that we help our survivors come to find themselves. logistically through our caseworkers, our care coordinators. They help with resources, wraparound resources. We have a residential program that if there's a survivor that come into our care and they need residential support, they come and we provide a bed and food and clothing and other emotional support for that survivor. And then also just when it comes down to big picture and creating awareness and prevention, we go out to the community. We talk to however many people we need to talk to because like you said earlier, there's still tons of people in this world that don't even know that human trafficking exists.
Yes.
And then Rachel, just so amazing with changing legislation in Tennessee over the past few years, being able to change 40 laws in Tennessee. So I think that there's boots on the ground work that we can do, but also big picture things that is necessary as well. Because I like to say that the pimps are sometimes more, I wouldn't say they're smarter, but they're more organized.
Yeah.
And if we could lay down our own selfish desires and partner with others and collaborate with others, I think that we can be more organized than the pimps.
Ladies, our time has slipped away, and we've only just begun. Is there a way that you can hang around and we can do a second show?
Sure.
To expand our conversation, because we've got more to talk about.
Sure.
I think it's important that we do that. And if you could do that, we're going to end this program, and then we're going to say hello in the next program, okay?
That sounds great.
But before we say goodbye, for those to find out more information, volunteer financially to help support the work that you're doing.
Absolutely.
Give us information how to do that.
The easiest is probably go to our website, restorecorps.org. So that's restorecorps.org. And there's a donate tab right there, which absolutely that's one of the most critical parts of being a part of this. As I mentioned, not everyone might be called to vocationally do this work, but if we are in the body of Christ, we are called to ransom the captive. And so that's a good on-ramp for anyone. And then, of course, volunteering. You can click through ways to get involved. I think that's actually what the tab says on our website. So you'll find Lonnie Proctor, our volunteer coordinator, her email right there for you to be able to start it off.
Friends, that's all the time we have on today's edition of Mid-South Viewpoint. Thanks for joining us. I'm Byron Tyler. We'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye.